What does the United States get right? Public lands. Between Federal Government Park Service, Forest Service, Bureau of Land Management, Fish and Wildlife lands and various state and local public lands, there are several 100 million acres of opportunity for recreation like hiking, camping, birdwatching, biking, skiing, hunting, fishing, sightseeing, or whatever you like to do to enjoy nature. Our national parks are possibly the greatest thing about our country. Thank you, Teddy Roosevelt. Ahem, thank you, John Muir. Thank you, everyone responsible for the founding of the NPS. Thank you, park rangers, for protecting tourists from themselves. Thank you, search and rescue officers, for keeping people away from the stairs. Aussie here. I think entertainment. Everyone talks shit about the US, but then spend most of their time listening to American music, film and TV. Edit, so this comment blew up. I'm stoked my biggest comment ever is showing some international love. Well, you did give us Bluey. Hadn't heard of it until now. We also are responsible for The Crocodile Hunter. The absolute best children's show. Thank you, Aussies, for making watching TV with a toddler bearable. They do jazz very, very well. The US postal system, it's the most far-reaching postal system in the world. We will deliver nearly anything to any mailbox. Do you live in the bottom of the Grand Canyon? Say no more, postal donkeys. Mules, postal mules. He was half right. Yes, but he also half-assed it. I love that in the US if you go back to school at 40 or 50, no one blinks an eye. If you get a degree at 80 or 90, you are a total hero. In many cultures you need to be done with school in your 20s. No one goes to school later in life. That's interesting because I hadn't even considered that wasn't a thing. I see on posts for careers all of the time, am I too old at 35, 41, 45 to go to school for X profession, and there's always someone encouraging them to go because they have a 55-yo in their class right now. I'm the 43-year-old in grad school right now. I don't think I could have gotten here any other way than the path I took, looking back. For some perspective, I'm in grad school in Japan RN, and 90% of the people that here get their master's and don't even work in their field, geosciences. In America, the geoscience jobs are aplenty, and they require degrees. I think in America degrees are viewed as specializations perhaps more than they should be, where in Asian countries they are more universal. Thanks for the perspective, I hadn't thought of that angle. We sort of don't understand that part, I think. We see depictions of there being so much pressure on Japanese teens to get into college and checking their scores etc. on your big exam day, and I always thought it was just too early to expect people to know what they want to do in life. Ada is huge, and nowhere else in the world have I seen accessibility as we see in America. I can't believe this is the first time I'm seeing this comment. The Ada is awesome. Handicap accessibility. Most people probably don't realize this, but when you go overseas, particularly to older cities, it can be extremely difficult for people with disabilities to get around. Here, every new building has to meet certain accessibility standards, and many old ones have been retrofitted. I did a study abroad in Eastern Europe, and one of the students in my cohort walked with those arm brace crutches. It was honestly awful for him. Frankly, I was conflicted that the program even sent him to this town where nothing was accessible. I saw him take some awful falls and truly hurt inside for how hard it was for him. Entertainment in general. You guys know how to put on a show. That's how we convinced Germany to give us the San Juan Islands and not to Canada. Speaking of Americans putting on a show in Germany, General Patton, after a controversy that led him to step down as General of the Army, worked with Hollywood to make a bunch of phony tanks and vehicles, and pose a fake army to deceive Hitler's forces, and helped contribute to D-Day's success. Accessibility code for buildings. I come from a country where disability is looked upon like a crime or fault. USA does an amazing job making things accessible. I haven't seen all of USA, but majority of the places has amazing system. George H.W. Bush said that the proudest achievement of his presidential administration was the passage of the Americans with Disabilities Act that mandated the much improved access to buildings. Later in life, when he was no longer able to walk and got around in a wheelchair, he made a point of saying that he had become the beneficiary of that act. Access for people with disabilities isn't perfect, but it's a hell of a lot better than it was when I was a child. To add to this, it's not just buildings. If I make a website, I have to add accessibility options for text-to-speech, use colors that colorblind people, such as myself, are easily able to see, and have photos have an accessibility caption so that blind people are able to know what the picture is of. Definitely agree with you, that we've come a long way for making sure disabilities aren't as limiting as they were even a generation or two ago. Video games are really starting to embrace it, color-blind modes and allowing you to disable button mashing sequences, as well as controller options like Microsoft's Adaptive Controller. The colorblind mode settings in video games have been a game changer for me. Some games even have specific features where you can pinpoint your specific type of colorblindness. Mine is red-green, deuteranopia, so being able to change enemies to yellow or orange and friendlies to blue has made a noticeable difference to my reaction time in certain areas where it's harder to tell the difference. Cafes and restaurants open between 2 and 5 p.m. Automatic complimentary water at cafes and restaurants. Free public restrooms. National parks. Free public toilets everywhere you go. It's kind of a culture shock to go to a different country to have to pay money to use the restroom. It's a necessity. I would rather people be allowed to use the restroom rather than do their business outside. Pro tip: fancy hotels have restrooms in lobby if you don't look homeless. The key is to always act and look like you belong there. If anyone ever questions you, my 2 favorite replies are no thank you or bist du Deutsche sprechen? Those usually disarm them enough for you to just keep walking. That's not even a proper German sentence. That way they'll be confused even if they speak German. 1000 IQ. Never let them know your next move. Give them an old tip of the cap and tap of the cane and they won't know until it is too late that your next move is to blast ass in the ceramic bowls in a room they maintain. I've always envied your wildlife. I'm from England and the only large wild animals, other than fish, we have are deer, boar and foxes. And they're incredibly rare. I've always thought it was so cool one country could have bears, moose, cougars, alligators, panthers, bison, buffalo, ect. Depending on where you are, deer and foxes are everywhere. Britain used to have bears, wolves, elk, lynx, and many other native animals that were locally driven to extinction by us. Frown. Theodore Roosevelt was far ahead of his time on conservation. If he wouldn't have founded the National Park Service, we would have driven most of these to extinction as well. This along with hunting laws makes all the difference. So lucky he respected nature like he did to save it before it was all gone. NASA. Our motion picture industry. Despite its criticisms, it has a global, cultural effect. Pop culture in general. Go to a bar in Ecuador and Fast Furious will be on the TV. Walk through a park in Greece and a busker will be playing a Nirvana cover. We kinda take it for granted, but wouldn't it feel odd if it was a different county dominating that space? Like if Swedish movies and sitcoms were just the biggest global hits for decades on end? Sometimes I think about that when I'm abroad and still seeing American media everywhere. I'll never forget walking through a remote village in the Caucasus Mountains where subsistence agriculture was the way of life. Walked past a group of kids and they were all singing along to a phone playing Empire State of Mind by Jay-Z. No running water, but they knew the song. Valuing actual wilderness in places like national parks. NBSP, here in England, they will restore or create natural habitats, which is sort of nice, but they are almost like zoos. They are too small to survive by themselves, so they are actively maintained. And in some English national parks, they actually allow housing developments as long as the architectural design is sympathetic. Here, countryside means farms. NBSP, there is still a notion in the USA of protecting some large wilderness areas from development. I love how far we took the concept. Look up somewhere like Gates of the Arctic, it's absolutely massive and doesn't even have road access. I've been there several times. It's the second biggest park in the country, a bit larger than the nation of Belgium, but also the least visited. Not because it isn't gorgeous, but because getting there is an adventure in and of itself. Aside from chartering a bush plane, the only way to get there is by driving the Dalton Highway, which has to be one of the most dangerous roads in America. Hundreds of miles between gas stations or any other sign of human civilization, no cellular internet service at basically any point, unpredictable weather, dangerous wildlife, etc. It's the only road I've ever been on where they give you a pamphlet full of safety warnings and suggested survival supplies. And that's the road that gets to the entrance of the park. There is a very scary sign on the highway between Idaho and Montana that says no gas stations next 150 miles, always freaks me out. Check out this cluster of signs on the Dalton, it's pretty unnerving. There should be one final sign a bit past those that says, have fun. Just to really put the cherry on top.